Hello everyone, my name is Don K. Preston. I am the president of Preterist Research Institute. I beg your indulgence for the sunglasses here. I have a busted blood vessel in my left eye and it's not very photogenic, doesn't look very good on camera, so I'm trying to cover it up just a little bit so that I can continue to share my thoughts with you here on YouTube. Thanks so much for joining me here for Preston's Ponderings. We've been discussing the horrific earthquake in Japan, followed by the tsunami. The things there they just touch us in our heart. We pray for those people. We give and we want to help so badly. But those events have raised many theological questions. Questions that are very serious. Many people are saying that what has happened is a sign that we're in the last days. Hal Lindsey, I'm sure, will have something to say about it if he hasn't already. Tim LaHaye is already on record as saying, it's a sign of the end. We're in the last days. Well, what I've been sharing with you is that we must understand the biblical definition of the last days. I want to share with you something here which to me is absolutely definitive. It helps us nail down the proper identity of the last days, and it helps us falsify, it helps the current, may I use the term ever so kindly, paranoia and fear that we're in the last days, and to give us assurance and reassurance of God's faithfulness in keeping His word when He said He would. Now, in order to set the stage, you need to understand something. According to the modern dispensational view, the paradigm of dispensationalism, it is believed and taught very strongly that the current church age was not predicted, not foretold anywhere in the Old Testament. Let me read to you a few quotes from Dwight Pentecost, who wrote an encyclopedic book entitled Things to Come. Very highly respected author and scholar. Let me read to you a couple of quotes here. On page 134 of his book, Things to Come, he said, "The existence of this present age, which was to interrupt God's established program with Israel, was a mystery." Unquote. On page 136, he said, "The existence of an entirely new age, which only interrupts temporarily God's program for Israel, is one of the strongest arguments for the premillennial position. It is necessary for one who rejects that interpretation to prove that the church itself is the consummation of God's program." On page 137, quote, "The concept must stand that this whole age," that's the Christian age, "with its program was not revealed in the Old Testament, but constitutes a new program and a new line of revelation in this present age. It has been illustrated how this whole age existed in the mind of God without having been revealed in the Old Testament. Thus, it's very clear that according to the dispensational view of things, right now, this time in history, was not spoken of anywhere in the Old Testament." Now, somebody may immediately say, well, that doesn't mean it wasn't predicted in Matthew chapter 24. Well, here's the deal. If you're going to say that Matthew chapter 24 is Jesus' reiteration and reaffirmation of the prophecies in the Old Testament, then you cannot say that what is happening now is the fulfillment of Matthew chapter 24 without saying it's the fulfillment of Old Testament prophecy. In other words, according to dispensationalism, Matthew chapter 24 predicts, with its prediction of earthquakes, famines, etc., predicts our present time and events right now in the 21st century. But Matthew chapter 24 is the reiteration of Jesus' appeals to the Old Testament over and over in Matthew chapter 24. He appeals to Old Testament prophecies. Therefore, if Matthew 24 is being fulfilled right now, in our day, that means the Old Testament is being fulfilled in our day. But if the Old Testament is being fulfilled in our day and time, that means that the Old Testament predicted the Christian age. And one of the fundamental upholding pillars of millennialism is thus knocked to the ground. Do you see how important it is to properly understand whether or not we're living in the last days? Now, for the rest of this segment, I want to demonstrate to you that the view that events in the Christian age were, in fact, predicted in the Old Testament, that Israel's last days were not postponed, as my dispensational friends claim that they were. Okay? In Deuteronomy chapter 32, 19 through 21, specifically verse 20 and 21, God said the following: I will hide my face from them. I will see what their, and he's speaking about Old Covenant Israel, I will see what their end will be. They are a perverse generation, children in whom is no faith. They have provoked me to jealousy by what is not God. They have provoked me or moved me to anger by their foolish idols. I will provoke them to jealousy by those who are not a nation. I will move them to anger by a foolish nation. God said that in Israel's latter end, in her last days, He would provoke them to jealousy by calling the Gentiles. I've already done a segment on that. I hope you'll look at it. But now watch this. In verse 29, God said, oh, that they were wise, that they would understand this. Oh, that they would understand their latter or their last end. So twice in Deuteronomy 32, God says, here are things that are going to happen in Israel's last days. Now, for brevity's sake, notice verse 43. God said, rejoice, O Gentiles, with His people, for He will avenge the blood of His servants and render vengeance to His adversaries. He will provide atonement for His land and His people. Unquote. Do you catch that? God said in Israel's last days, in her latter end, He would avenge the blood of His saints. Now watch this. Jesus appeared in the last days. That's unequivocal. Hebrews chapter 1 verse 1. He appeared at the end of the age. Hebrews 9:26. And notice what Jesus promised. In Matthew chapter 23, 34 and following, Jesus said to the Jerusalem authorities and the people gathered there in the temple, behold, I send to you prophets, wise men, and scribes. Some of them you shall scourge and persecute and chase from city to city, that upon you may come all of the righteous blood shed on the earth, from righteous Abel unto Zacharias son of Barachias, whom you slew between the temple and the altar. Verily I say unto you, all of these things will come upon this generation. Now watch. Very simply, God said this. Deuteronomy 32. In Israel's last days, at her last end, He would avenge the blood of the martyrs. Jesus appeared in the last days, and Jesus said that all of the blood of all of the martyrs would be avenged and judged in His generation in the judgment of Jerusalem. That occurred in AD 70. Now what that means is this. It means that Israel's last days, the countdown of the 70 weeks, was not postponed in Matthew 12 or Matthew 16 or Acts chapter 3. Because Deuteronomy said that in Israel's last days, the blood of God's martyrs would be avenged. Jesus said that would be done at the fall of Jerusalem in AD 70. Therefore, the judgment of Jerusalem in AD 70 was Israel's latter days. Daniel 9 was not postponed. The 70-week countdown was not postponed. Israel's last days were in existence in AD 70. And that means that the horrific earthquake and tsunami and the threat of the atomic meltdown in Japan do not belong to the last days. They're not predictions that belong to Israel's prophecies. They are not signs that the end is near. You know, folks, to me, that's pretty wonderful news. We've got more on this important topic. Thank you for joining me for Preston's Ponderings. I'll see you on the flip side.